I'm David Merrill, the president of the US-Indonesia Society, USINDO, coming to you from Washington, D.C., though we are a binational organization and have an office also in Jakarta. Welcome everyone to our special seminar co-hosted by USINDO and the US-Indonesia Council on Religion and Pluralism on the major role of religious institutions and leaders in Indonesia and the United States in moderating the coronavirus pandemic. How can positive roles be enhanced and negative ones reduced? I wish to acknowledge at the outset the presence of our USINDO co-chairs, our Indonesian co-chair, Pak Theo Sambuaga, and our US co-chair, Ambassador Bob Blake, and of Ibu Yenny Wahid, the Indonesian co-chair of the Indonesia-US Council on Religion and Pluralism, USINDO's partner in today's program. We also have a large audience today, probably 250 listeners, indicative of the great interest in this topic at this time. We're fortunate to have an exceptionally distinguished group of panelists from both countries to address our topic. Yenny Wahid, Executive Director of the Wahid Foundation, Katherine Marshall, Senior Fellow, Georgetown University's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, Dr. Azyumardi Azra, Senior Professor of Islamic History and Culture and former Rector at the Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University of Jakarta. Reverend Dr. Henriette Lebang. Dr. Siti, Reverend Lebang is chair of the advisory board of the Communion of Churches in Indonesia. Dr. Siti Ruhaini, Dzuhayatin, main expert staff in the Office of Presidential Staff, Republic of Indonesia. Imam Mohamed Magid, Executive Director of the Al Dulles Area Muslim Society, the Adams Center, the largest or one of the largest Muslim centers in the Washington area. And joining us momentarily, Galen Carey, Vice President for Government Affairs, National Association of Evangelicals. They'll help us understand from various perspectives the beneficial role that can be played by religious institutions and leaders in Indonesia and the United States in messaging and policies to dampen the spread of this terrible coronavirus. I'd like to mention for our viewers, our many welcome viewers, that if you have questions, there's a button at the bottom of your screen for questions, and click the button and submit the questions, and we will pick from those questions. At about half an hour, we plan to have the last half hour be for questions and answers. I'd just like to say a few words of introduction on the substance. Of course, a great proportion of the world's population is accustomed to turn to religious leaders for guidance in times of crisis. But the converse, the strategic role of religious institutions and the role they can play in development, and particularly in health, is far less understood. Many of Indonesia's religious institutions have been delivering beneficial health and nutrition information to their members for decades with proven results for health. Indonesia is a leader in that field. They and their US counterparts are now in a position to contribute powerfully to resolving the most massive health crisis of the past century. Today's program will explore and compare the recent actions taken by religious institutions and leaders in both countries, examine the effects they have on coronavirus response, and identify opportunities to enhance the beneficial role religious institutions can play. In recent weeks, Indonesia has made its key decisions to align with religious institutions for disseminating useful information to the public for curbing the coronavirus, furthering public acceptance. President Jokowi has banned the practice of mudik, the exodus to villages by millions of Indonesians during Ramadan. Indonesia's two largest Islamic organizations, Muhammadiyah and NU, urge followers to skip mudik this year. The Indonesian Ulama Council, MUI, issued a fatwa advising Muslims to curtail communal activities, use virtual technology, and practice social distancing. Indonesian Christian organizations have urged similar practices. In the US, there has been similar guidance issued by religious leaders, including Muslims, Christians, and the Jewish community. The response has been positive overall, though with some important exceptions. But it's clear that understanding and fully utilizing the role religious institutions can play in this crisis is a key element of flattening the curve and moderating the spread for everyone. I now invite Ibu Yenny Wahid, our council co-chair, to give her perspective of the role of religion in countering COVID-19 in Indonesia. Ibu Yenny needs little introduction, but she is the executive director of the Wahid Foundation, which champions the humanitarian vision of former President Abdurrahman Wahid, our late father, in advancing the development of tolerant, multicultural, democratic, and nonviolent society in Indonesia, and many other attributes. Ibu Yenny, may we have your comments, please?
Thank you very much, David. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon you. Good evening for our Indonesian audience, and good morning for the US audience. First of all, thank you very much, David, for organizing these webinars, and also thank you very much for all the speakers for giving us your precious time to share with us your thoughts on this very important issue. The theme that we have picked for tonight's webinar, role of religion in flattening the curve, as David mentioned, on our struggle, global struggle against the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think I'd like to start by acknowledging our other speakers. Thank you very much, Dr. Azyumardi Azra, Imam Magid, Dr. Marshall, Dr. Henriette Lebang, Dr. Ruhaini, and all other audience who are joining us today. First of all, let me give you the latest data when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic figures in Indonesia. So far we've got confirmed cases of more than 12,000 cases in Indonesia, with the number of deaths around 930. Some people suggest that this is a conservative number, given the fact that there are more burials and there are more death cases that are not yet disclosed as COVID related, but some experts suggest that it might be because it's not, it was not examined during after the death. So we've got probably could be double than the official number of deaths. And we've got about 230,000 people under surveillance, and more than 20,000 of people suspected as suspected patients. But we also have recovered patients in the numbers of more than 2,000 numbers. So it's good news. And when it comes to numbers, I think Indonesia is doing quite well when compared to other nations who have far worse numbers than us. And so when we go back to the issue at hand, which is the role of the religious institutions and religious figures in helping with the pandemic, then when you mention, the mere mention of religion and the pandemic, conjures some images of some recent news about religious gatherings. For example, in Indonesia, there were these large gatherings that happened in Goa, South Sulawesi, by the Ijtima Jamaat Tabligh, that was attended by 25,000 participants, and also other cases in which there was the ordination of the bishop in East Nusa Tenggara, which was attended by thousands of people. That led people to believe that maybe religion actually has a more of an hindrance at the moment, because of religious leaders and religious organizations are not doing their parts in helping to flatten the curve. But on the other hand, we're actually seeing more and more efforts by religious institutions to dispel with lots of efforts, such as issuing guidance and helping with the delivery of foods for the needy and people who are impacted by the COVID-19. And also we're seeing religious leaders working closely with government to make sure that many messages concerning the social distancing and also the need to practice safe hygienic lifestyle using religious idioms. So on one hand, of course, this is a very difficult situation for Indonesian Muslims, given the fact that this is Ramadan, and also the American Muslims, of course, given that this is Ramadan, and during Ramadan, there are many rituals that are usually practiced collectively, going to the mosque together, the Tarawih, the Itikaf, and staying at the mosque, praying at the mosque. And like you mentioned, David, we've got the Mudik as well. This is like the Thanksgiving in the United States, where families go home to spend some time with their loved ones. So these are all the challenges that we're facing. And I think some pundits have accused the government of Indonesia of being a bit indecisive about the response in terms of policies of not allowing people to initially to gather and make religious gatherings. But more and more, we're seeing efforts from the government as well as from the society and the private sectors to come together to make sure that there are concerted efforts. There are community approaches that are taken to combat these diseases. And this is where the religious organizations come into play. Clerics, of course, have more effective approach when it comes to dispensing with messages that are believed by the congregations, using religious idioms, using religious narratives can be quite effective in getting people to understand different perspectives about these COVIDs. And of course, the challenge remains that there are some groups who are taking a more of a simplistic and also fatalistic approach when it comes to religion, saying that what happens is the will of God. Therefore, if you you should not fear the virus more than you fear God. There are rhetorics like that also circulating, and this is an instance in which the wisdom that comes from the more progressive religious leader are needed so much more in this in this time of a crisis. So we are seeing, of course, conflict of narratives happening, but we're also seeing quite interesting phenomena, which is that there's a convergence of rhetorics as well. So before, Indonesia was somewhat divided by a different religious, I suppose, different approaches to religious lines, the so-called the progressive and the conservatives, as well as the radicals. But now you're seeing more and more rhetorics that are in convergence with one another. You're seeing groups that are considered quite radicals, but issuing guidelines that obligating their followers to stay home. You're seeing also groups that were seen as being more progressive before, but are taking a much more conservative approach, and in fact challenging governments for not allowing them to pray in mosques or in other religious buildings. So it's very interesting phenomena that we're seeing now. But I think all in all, religious institutions needs to be included in the whole efforts to combat the virus, because of the influence that they have, because of the networks that they have down to the village level, and the sheer numbers of memberships that they have that will enable them to reach out to communities much more effectively than government officials. So the way forward, we're seeing that religion will remain quite an influential factor in persuading people to adopt a much more constructive approach to this to the pandemic, as well as we're seeing a different way of people expressing their religious rituals. We're seeing the use of technology more for people to use as a way to pray. We see da'wah online. We see more proliferations of sermons carried out using creative use of technology, Zooms and etc., interactive ways using technology. So this will continue in the future. And this also has a great benefit in that the people still feel that they are participating in religious activities without having to leave their homes. So I suppose I've reached my 8 minutes mark. So I'll just give it back to David, and we can continue the conversation later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ibu Yenny. We'll now hear from our other panelists, followed by our Q&A session. We'll start with Katherine Marshall, who's in a position to give us her perspective on the role of religion in development generally, as well as in Indonesia, followed by Dr. Azyumardi Azra, then Dr. Henriette Lebang, Dr. Siti Ruhaini, and Imam Magid of the Adams Center. Katherine Marshall is a senior fellow at Georgetown University's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, and professor in the practice of development, conflict, and religion in the Walsh School of Foreign Service. She is distinguished in the study of the record of religious institutions contributing to development and health objectives around the world and in COVID-19 now. Katherine, please. There's no sound.
Unmute. Katherine, yeah. You need to unmute.
Right, I have to unmute.
Okay, there you go. Thank you, Katherine.
It's wonderful to see all of you. Wish we could all be together, but this is definitely a second best. I think the reason that I'm here is that we, sitting at Georgetown University in the World Faiths Development Dialogue, started very early on, inspired by our experience with the Ebola crisis, to ask ourselves for the COVID crisis, what's religion got to do with it? And the answer, of course, is very complicated. In many ways, we're talking about the proverbial blind people and the elephants, where people are seeing very different aspects of what's happening. It's really revealed, I think, the problem of religious literacy within policy communities, but also in the general public. So you see the amplification of one story way out of proportion, with a sense that religious people, for example, there is a lot of discussion of the divide between faith and science, which is a fallacy, because of course many scientists have a religious faith and many religious people have deep respect for science. It's put the questions of the relationship between public health which tends to be, in fact, if you could say, quite authoritarian in its traditions, in a position where they need to listen much more to the different voices. And in this pandemic, the scientific knowledge is really changing almost day by day. And therefore, the idea that there is a single message, for example, about the role of children, has had to be adapted time and time again. The positive news here, and this we are, just to do a parenthesis of what we are doing from my kitchen actually, is that we are collecting resources from all over the world in a repository of information. We're sending out a note every day, and you're all, of course, very welcome to receive the note with a highlight. So yesterday, in fact, we sent a note that focused on the many different guidance documents that religious institutions have prepared and that are being prepared for religious institutions. We have a series of webinars, and we're looking at some specific issues. So for example, one of the specific issues that's a concern to us is what is happening with conflicts that have a religious element to them. Are they getting worse? Are they getting better? What's known? What's not known? And again, a professor in my long distant past urged us all to think, if God were your research assistant, what would you want to know? And one of the concerns we have is that there are huge gaps in our knowledge, that in the same way as during the East Asia financial crisis of 97 to 99, we found that I was at the World Bank at the time, the information systems that we were collecting were not giving us what we needed to know about the vulnerabilities of specific groups, of how things were changing. So all of those unanswered questions are ones that we are, to be honest, scrambling to answer. How do we put together the complex picture of what's happening? Very briefly, I think there are 4 sort of categories of information, and Dr. Wahid emphasized very much the first one, which is what's actually happening with gatherings, with changes in practice, how much tension is there around them. Our sense is that the vast majority of religious people are respecting the Council of Public Health. The exceptions, unfortunately, are receiving the most attention. Just was hearing about Myanmar, where there is already acute tensions around a specific gathering that contributed to many of the recorded cases. So the gatherings, the practices, how are people dealing with it, what's happening with the online shift, etc. The second is so that's sort of the public health area. But the second is, of course, the effects of the shutdowns. And what is that doing to the most vulnerable groups? Elderly, we are all very conscious of the elderly, disabled, people in refugee camps. What's happening to children? In many cases, children who've been confined. Is violence against children? We know domestic violence against women has increased sharply by any indicators that we have as people lose income and jobs. So this second question of the shutdown effects. But here we're looking to religious communities to help the policymakers identify the groups most in need and the mechanisms that are possible to respond to those needs. And of course, the systems are not developed. In other words, they're often the religious actors do not have seats at the table. How do we filter this information? How do we be sure that we know what's happening with orphanages, with old people's homes, with all of the different settings where people are vulnerable? This brings me to the question of restarting, which is on many people's minds, whether how do countries open up in ways that will not make the situation worse and that will gain the most benefits? So there is a lot of analysis and discussion and people thinking about this, but again, it's in a very, very fragmented manner. And then the fourth is an interesting set of questions, which we need to look to our religious colleagues, our religious actors, for, is reimagining a future post-COVID. In other words, how do we learn? We know from history that pandemics almost always mark enormous changes in life, in society, in philosophy, in thinking. And we do have now two narratives. One narrative, the positive one, is that people will, as Yenny was suggesting, realize that there's a common purpose, a common enemy, that we will see a breakdown in tensions and coming together. But the other narrative, which unfortunately is the historic one, is that it will aggravate tensions, that people will look for scapegoats, that they will find enemies even where they don't exist, that conflicts that are already underway will be exacerbated. And of course, this is up to us to decide which of the narratives is correct, to start thinking now about the kind of future we would like to have. As someone said, you should never waste a crisis. We should be looking with imagination, with energy, with participation, but also with rigor, intellectual rigor, to what this means for climate change. What does it mean for children, for education? What are we learning, and how can we, in fact, truly build back better? So perhaps I will stop it with that.
Thank you so much, Katherine. Now I'd like to turn to Dr. Azyumardi Azra. He has a global reputation for promoting international academic exchange, cross-cultural and cross-religious dialogue, and for making an outstanding contribution to understanding between the Islamic and non-Islamic world. He has won innumerable awards, including an honorary title of CVE awarded by the United Kingdom, and many others. I believe Dr. Azra may speak, or I invite him to speak or whenever he wants, but to try to cover the role of the Indonesian Islamic religious institutions in COVID-19 thus far. He would be in a good position to tell us what Islamic religious teachings say about the relaxation of religious practices during a health emergency, and how else Islam in Indonesia might contribute to lessening the crisis. Dr. Azra, please.
Thank you very much, David. Fellow speakers, very good evening, very good morning in Eastern Standard Time. I'm very happy to be here and to join the conversation. Much has been said by Ibu Yenny, so I'm not going to repeat, and then I'm not going to, probably I'm going to add only here and there, probably. First of all, I think religious organization, religious leaders, let's say mainstream religious organization, mainstream religious leaders have been very supportive to help, to support government in facing this COVID-19 spread all over Indonesia. The Council of Indonesian Ulama, the MUI, actually has issued 3 fatwas. The first one related to the regular 5 times prayer can be conducted, can be done at home, and instead of mosque, congregational prayer in the mosque. That's also the case with Friday prayer. Friday prayer can also be be done at home, and also Tarawih prayer. This is the first fatwa. So I think the main reason, the main consideration for this fatwa is that it is obligatory for Muslim to protect life. In Sharia, there are 5 protection that should be taken into consideration for Muslims. The first one is hifzun nafs. It is called maqasidus Sharia, the aim of the Islamic law, the aim of Sharia. The first is the protection of life. So everybody should protect not only his or her own life, but also other lives. So based on this consideration, not only the MUI, but also Muhammadiyah and NU issued religious edicts stating that Friday prayer actually can be conducted, can be performed at home rather than in congregation in the mosque. That also the case with the 5 regular obligatory prayers, daily prayers. That's the first fatwa. The second fatwa related to the proper treatment of dead bodies of the victim of coronavirus. And of course, we cannot treat these dead bodies in accordance to the fiqh, to the regular fiqh, normal fiqh. But therefore, the MUI issued a fatwa allowing that these dead bodies should not be, let's say, be washed, like the people who dead, what is that? That not because of this kind of pandemic coronavirus. The third fatwa related to that Muslims should can pay zakah, zakah earlier rather than at the end of Ramadan, because it is customary for Indonesian Muslim to pay their mandatory zakah, and also of course the zakah fitri, the zakah that should be paid, a kind of poll tax, for any Muslim, for all Muslim to pay it. And then Muslim organization, including Muhammadiyah and NU, appeal that a Muslim should pay zakah, infak and sadaqah, let's say giving and sharing, Islamic philanthropy as soon as possible in order to help people who have lost their jobs, who now have nothing to eat. So this, the efforts of Muslim organizations has been very, very supportive to not only for government but also for the community as a whole, because we are very fortunate in Indonesia. We have very strong and vibrant big Muslim organization across the country. Of course, the NU is the largest, and second is Muhammadiyah, and then they have also their own wing organization that do their activities related to Islamic philanthropy. They collect donation and distribute donation everywhere, because there are people, again, there are the weak and the unemployed everywhere, not only in big cities like Jakarta and Surabaya, but also even in the rural area, because they cannot go everywhere. They cannot go for work, for instance. So I think in general, it is difficult for us to imagine that Indonesia without this Muslim organization, without activities, without program of this organization. They give not only religious guidance, but also they are very active in, as I said earlier, collecting donation, collecting alms giving from the rich and then distributed to the poor, because actually, you know, there has been a lot of criticism to government, which is very slow in giving some necessary help for the poor, for the weak. There is a problem of bureaucracy, problem of administration, or something like that. So I think we should be very grateful to this Muslim organization and Muslim. You know, you cannot imagine, because they play a very great role not only in helping the poor and the weak, but also even students. To take one example, for instance, the Association of Muhammadiyah University actually disbursed something like 5 million US dollars, something like 78 billions rupiah to help students, because the students also, you know, cannot go home because of travel restriction, because of some kind of semi-lockdown that has been imposed by the government, not only in Jakarta but also in other areas, not only in Java but also even in Sumatra and also in Sulawesi. So there are many students stranded everywhere in big cities, in universities, around universities, and then and of course the government so far has not been able to help these students. So again, Muslim organization have been very active to help the student, not only to give them foods, but also sometimes also to buy, you know, what is that? To support them in order for them to be able to connect to for the uh, uh, mobile connection, for instance. You have to pay, and then they do not have money to pay that. So the university has to support them. So I think I have to stop here, David, and then we can continue conversation after with question and answer. Thank you very much.
Makasih. And I would like to stay in the Indonesian side and turn next to Dr. Henriette Lebang, who is chair of the advisory board of the Communion of Churches in Indonesia, PGI. It's the largest ecumenical Christian organization in Indonesia. She has been general secretary of the Christian Conference of Asia, member of the Central Committee of the World Council of Churches currently, and is known for her advocacy for interreligious harmony, women's rights, and gender equality. Dr. Lebang, please inform us, if you will, about how Indonesian Christian groups are complying with the guidelines and remaining challenges, other topics of your choice. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for inviting me to participate in this webinar. Friends, good morning for friends in the United States and good evening for friends in Indonesia. The COVID-19 reached Indonesia in the beginning of March 2020. And as the virus began to hit some parts of the world and spread quickly to different parts of the world, of course, it made us nervous and began to raise the question when it will hit Indonesia. And some steps of preparation have been taken by the government and by the different communities, different organizations, including religious organizations. And I think this pandemic challenged us all the inhabitants of the world as probably never before, to work closer together in our solidarity and in our togetherness, overcome this difficult situation that has taken so many lives. The churches in Indonesia realized the importance of working together to address this huge challenge. A Communion of Churches Indonesia immediately established what we call the Church Combat COVID-19. And since the beginning, the Communion of Churches had collaborated with a Muslim organization, Duafa, to especially to train the volunteers from the young people from different church denominations, especially for spraying disinfectants in buildings and facilities of the church, mosques, and schools. To enable the people in the church to understand what's really going on, the churches issue some pastoral letters. Of course, in the beginning, many church leaders are very, very challenged by this. And sometimes, the question on, well, who is the power? Who is handling the world today? Is it the power of God? Is it bigger than the teeny coronavirus? Yeah. Why should we afraid? Our God is stronger than the virus, and etc. But slowly, the people began to understand that we need to do things to stop the spread of this virus. And leaders of the churches support the government policy of stay home, work from home, study from home, and worship at home, and encourage the members to respect this policy. By doing, for instance, encourage and facilitate the churches to worship at home through virtual services. In the beginning, some churches find it difficult to worship from home instead of gathering in the church. But slowly, we realize that it is important to stay home, to not to be not together with many people. And most of the churches in Indonesia apply live streaming services. Some places cannot be reached by internet. And therefore the pastors prepare the worship resources for the family worship at home, in their homes. Also regularly participate in interdenomination prayers. People believe that prayers is very important in their lives, especially in facing these huge challenges. Now, churches also support the medical staff by providing medical equipment according to COVID-19 protocols. All Christian hospitals render their service to assist the victims of COVID-19. And of course, funds need to be raised in order to provide all those, health equipment and distributed masks for the people in the streets, people in the church, but also all people in the streets. So it is realized that COVID-19 is not only a health issue, but has a significant impact on social and economic life of the people. Many people lost their jobs. Many people frustrated for long-term staying at home. And many people also facing, I think, some difficulties in dealing with this issue. And therefore, the pastoral and diaconal ministries of the churches is become very important to express the solidarity with all people and provide support for people in need, regardless of their social, cultural, and religious backgrounds. Also, the churches, the Communion of Churches in Indonesia encourage the church, in anticipation of the possible prolonged impacts of COVID. The church called the attention of the people for the importance of establishing the food security for the community. And many people began to collect some foods to be distributed to people in need. and also encourage people to plant vegetables in their homes. Anyway, people spend their time, a long time at the home, so they need to, how to use the time productively. And we need to prepare foods for our daily needs. Some also churches participate in providing or in supporting educational programs for children in collaboration, of course, with the government. All in all, the COVID-19 has made people come closer together, working together hand in hand for the sake of common humanity and the sustainability of this planet. Of course, there are a lot of adjustment needed, and people, they like it or not, need to come out of the, how do you call that, their old habit and transform their life, transform their lives in such a difficult situation. Change many things changing in our life today. And whether we like it or not, we need to adjust into that new situation. I think I can stop here now, and maybe we can continue later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Henriette. We'll now turn to Dr. Siti Ruhaini. Dr. Siti is the main expert at the Office of Presidential Staff, KSP, in Indonesia. Previously served as Special Advisor on Religious Affairs to President Jokowi, and has been actively promoting women's rights and human rights with various stakeholders, including Islamic-based organizations. I invite her to speak on the steps the Jokowi government is taking, including the ban on mudik, and is working government's work with religious leaders and its impact on the crisis issues ahead. Dr. Ruhaini, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mariel. Good morning, colleagues in the US, and also good late evening for colleagues in Indonesia. First of all, I would like to extend my profound appreciations for inviting me to this important and timely discussion on the role of religious institution in response to the current pandemic COVID-19. I would like to convey Ramadan Karim for our Muslim brothers and sisters in US and also in Indonesia, as well as to convey the happy Waisak, because now in Indonesia we this is a public holiday for Buddhist Waisak event, and also happy belated Easter for our Christian colleagues. COVID-19 pandemic occurring and spreading coincidence with the subsequent religious events in Indonesia, starting from Nyepi or Seclusion Day for the Buddhist community, celebrated in the 25th of March, with usually huge gathering and crowds taking place in Bali, particularly in Bali, where people rally with music, dance from their villages to the big temples for the whole day. And then after that, and it's become also a major tourist attraction. A week later, our Christian colleagues celebrate Easter, where churches usually full of adherents for several day services. Shortly, Ramadan is coming with numerous rituals, celebrations such as a public event from iftar gathering in the community, cafe, luxurious hotel, public taraweh in the mosque, as well as dawn praying for the whole month. And the following is the annual mudik, as Ambassador Mariel mentioned. This is actually the, as also Mbak Yenny mentions about Thanksgiving in the US. And this is the huge exodus from the big cities to the smaller cities and villages. That event will be taking place in 2 weeks time. And this is a national long holiday of the it affairs for everybody, not only for the Muslim, traveling from to the hometowns to meet parents, relatives once a year. It causes heavy traffic queues for hundreds of kilometers for visiting colleagues. School reunion and alike happen for about 2 weeks and create similar traffic issue in the way back to the big cities. And 1.5 months later, the Hajj session is coming also. For hundreds of thousands of Muslims are traveling to Mecca, Saudi Arabia, with all traditional ceremonies following the events and involve huge crowds influx to the airport to say goodbye. So this is actually the events, the religious event following the widespread of COVID-19 in Indonesia. And of course, as mentioned by Yenny and also Professor Azyumardi and also Dr. Henry, that this create complications and create tensions between the beliefs and the authority of the states and controlling public order. And also, aside from that, we also have economic problems because in contrary to the spread of COVID-19, which asked us to avoid public crowds, and the economy to adjust to that crisis. So the government is actually trying to negotiate between the belief, which is the authorities in the Islamic ulama and also the Islamic organizations in the one side, and the other side is how to control the public order in order to prevent COVID-19 to further spread. So this is actually the complication that the governments face in responding to the COVID-19. But as also mentioned earlier, this is thanks God that we have a very strong civil society and also the social modality in Indonesia, like religious organization, cultural organization that exist long before the independence. So when we are talking about what's happening now in Indonesia, what is revealed is not the state responsibility, but what we have now in the play is actually the nationhood. The nationhood, which is actually built not only by the state but also by the civil society. So the state is actually only in the apart from the statehood in Indonesia. So the state is not alone when it's come to the issue of the nation state. And COVID-19 crisis is actually not the state issue. This is the nation issue. So this is actually the times that the government is encouraging and also engaging all the social modality that we have in Indonesia together working on coping with the crisis. Professor Azyumardi mentioned in detail about the modality that we have in the religious, in the Islamic organization, and also Dr. Henry enlightened us with what's happening with the Christians organization. That is actually giving us the strength, giving the support to the state to work together with all the with all the nations, with all the components of the nation to work together for the sake of the Indonesian people. So the role of religious organization is actually it's very significant and very strong support for the state in order to cope and as well as how to manage the multifaceted crisis, because it is noted lately that more than 2 million people now, those who engage in the informal sector, including the online sector, that is now is also daunting in Indonesia, that the government has to take care of this. And the issue of unemployment in the recent or temporary unemployment leads to the considerations of as whether to prevent them or to hold them stay in the big cities or allow them going back to the smaller cities and the villages where all the families of the employees, the families of the workers inhibit in that area. So this is actually also a daunting problem faced by the government, where eventually the negotiation is allow them to reunite with their family in the small cities, in the villages, with of course observing compliance with the COVID protocol. And Indonesia is huge, and of course one issue of one issue of handling the travel of the unemployment workers to their cities is one big issue. So it is not possible actually for only the governments to do that. So the social modality and also the good relationship between the states and the civil society organization is actually a strong support in the time of the crisis. And this is because once the major and the mainstream religious organization is always neutral in politics. This is actually also the modality that we have in Indonesia, so that there is no such a political interest in the relationship between the state and their social organization. And it's helped a lot in this time of crisis, because in their coordinations of the Ministry of Religious Affairs, the governments and the civil and the religious organization, including the MUI, Muhammadiyah, NU, the Christians, the Buddhists, Hindus, Confucians, and also the local beliefs. We are all together, coming together to see how to negotiate between the beliefs and the health regime, as mentioned by Dr. Marcel, because this is usually is unnegotiable. But now we have to come together to see the possibility to negotiate between the two, in order to establish the strong understandings and the strong and constructive engagement of all the components of the state. The components of the nations. And now we witness that this is now is in a play. This is now in the progress that we can cooperate each other. All the religious groups and organizations are involved in the National Task Force for coping COVID-19, either formally or informally. but this task force directly under the leaderships of President Jokowi, working with the religious organizations, not only as mentioned earlier on the religious guidance, but also in much more humanitarian services. So Nahdlatul Ulama, for example, have a huge support on how to take care of the unemployed workers. And also the Muhammadiyah hospitals, some of the Muhammadiyah hospitals now accommodated hundreds of the patients, the COVID patients. And also all the alms giving, the charity agencies now is going hands in hands with the government, with the Minister of Social Affairs, with the National Task Force together to identify and also to deliver logistic support to the needy people. So that is actually things that make us strong, and that is actually that the governments are conveying their profound appreciations to all the religious organizations, religious leaders, religious figures, working both sides and convincing a religious adherents to comply with the protocols, to comply with the health regime that is actually for the betterment of the Indonesian people in one side, and in the other sides that the charity agencies is very helpful in supporting the governments to cope with this with this crisis. But as mentioned earlier by Mbak Yenny, that we also noticed the activations of the terrorist cells in some parts of Indonesia, and the government is very responsive to that. Immediately that the cell has been taken care by the police, and also some of the criminals is we are dealing also with all of this issue in the midst of this crisis. So as part of the executive office of the government, I think I would like to conclude these presentations by saying that the appreciation, the profound appreciation has been conveyed by the president, and also he himself has the opportunity to have a religious session with all the leaders from the religious organization and religious groups. And this is actually part of what I call in the nations is at work now in coping and also in responding to the pandemic crisis. So I stop here, Ambassador Muriel, and I'm looking forward for question and answer later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Siti. I'd now like to move on to the US side and turn to my good friend, Imam Mohamed Magid, the Executive Director of the Adams Center in Washington, many other distinctions that he has. To save time, let me just ask a question. Imam Magid, what steps have been taken by US mosques, and how is Islam playing its role in lessening the spread of the virus? Other topics of your choice. Imam Magid, please.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Merrill, for your leadership, for guiding us today to speak about the contribution of the religious community and religious leaders in addressing COVID-19. I would like to greet my brothers and sisters also from Indonesia. I wear my Indonesian shirt that I bought when I was in Jakarta, that beautiful country of Indonesia. And it's very interesting that you are at night and we are during the day, I'm still fasting. I start my fasting and you are already broke your fast. But we have in a conference day and night, zone and Zoom. That would never have happened without COVID-19. But let me address the issue that ambassadors have asked me. We made a decision in our area here that we will not make any religious decision without the healthcare officials telling us what to do. And based on the governor of Virginia telling us that the gathering of 10 people will not be allowed because of the spread of this COVID-19, the night before, Friday, which is Thursday night, I made a decision by gathering the Imams in the metropolitan area, about 28 of them. And I told them that we would like to close the mosque. And we had a discussions, I had medical doctor on the call, and then we closed all the mosque next day. And now being the mosque completely closed, and we don't have any daily prayers or Friday prayers or wedding or any funeral being held inside the mosque. The decision being made, based on the understanding from Islamic law that we have to ask the people of expertise in those issues. And the people of expertise are the people in medical field. Therefore, we as a religious leader have to respond to the people of expertise. And that is answering the questions of relationship between religion and science. And the trust has to be built there between the religious community and the healthcare industry, our providers, or authority, by saying that we're going to defer all decision regarding health to health authority. And then we respond as religious leaders to that. Therefore, I can tell you that all of my activities is virtual. Being given Friday sermon virtual. We're doing the Friday the night prayer of Ramadan virtual. Like I brought all the people who memorize the Holy Quran and they recite the Quran at night, and people see the English translation. We have the talk between, and therefore we move to a virtual community. It is very important, though, to as we speak about the shift happen in culture and activities, to talk about the vulnerability of the community. That you have to remember that in Ramadan, about 600 people used to come to our mosque to break the fast. Some of those people don't have family. And the only family they have is the mosque. What do you do with those people? Well, we have created a social service committee to address the need of this group. Mental health issues, providing food for them, and connect with them socially. Therefore, we have created a list of many people that we know, and then we announce to the community that whoever want to connect to this program of providing food to them, we have provided service to those people. Well, that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of this is that how can we help those people who have loved ones who pass away? The Imam cannot be there during the funeral. Will not be able to help them with the washing. Then we created video training for the family, how to do their own washing, if allowed. It's allowed. Because in some funeral home, they gird you up and they allow you to do that. We told them if you could not wash, then you should bury without washing. Because if there's any possibility of this sickness being transferred to you through the washing, you should not do that. Therefore, we had a meeting with the funeral home, and the funeral home decided no family should wash. No family should wash their loved one. And those Muslim funeral homes. And they said they will handle it themselves because they do have the equipment, but they don't have the equipment for everybody from the family, members of the family. That one thing. Then we told them how to lead the funeral prayer. And we told them it has to be less than 10 people. And the rest you can do it online, where you can gather people to recite Quran, called Khatam, completing the whole Quran online and make dua for them. Our clinic in our mosque, we have 7 branches, and one of our branch has a clinic, is providing now a test for COVID-19 so that the community can find something convenient to access these facilities, and for Muslim and people of other faith, because this clinic is not for Muslim only. We have Christians and Jewish doctors work on this clinic because we believe the service has to be for all members of our community. Now, I conducted 3 seminars for training of Imams in the issue of how can we serve our community virtually. We talk about counseling, how can we deliver religious sermon, and how can we address the issue of parenting. And therefore we have the parenting classes now online to share with our community, how can you help your children who stay at home from school to manage this stressful time and to be able to fulfill their academic requirements while they have a good mental health, being, like the mental health well-being being taken care of. Also, as Professor Marshall have said, she said that with the issue of domestic violence, we have done now 3 sessions to address the issue of healthy family. How can we address our community at this time to reduce any kind of vulnerability of people at risk? There's some people, they may have abusive relationship before COVID-19. Now the risk have increased, and addressing how people who are in this situation can receive help and where they can go to get that help. The amazing things also is the collaboration with our friend from the other faith. And I would like to thank Professor Marshall again for what they provide for us, the information, the wealth of information Berkeley Center have provided for all of us, where we can see the best practice. But we've been doing a lot of interfaith work and COVID-19 way of connecting, which is online. And now every week, actually, group of pastor, evangelical pastor, imams, and rabbi, we meet online across America. We talk about issues that concern our communities. How can we work together to address the need of our community? There's certain issues that we have to address in our community is the healthcare workers. They really been in the front line, and their family have taken big hit. Some of them are contracted the virus, and there's a lot of fear, and therefore we've been addressing and talking to the Muslim Medical Association in America to see how can we help those family. I have conducted myself virtual spiritual program with them. And then we have the last thing I want to say is to get our community to talk to our local government. We've been meeting with the governor of Virginia and his office. Yesterday there was a meeting to talk about what it looked like when you start reopening again, and what are the steps will be taken into that, and also addressing the post-COVID-19 impact of on the community, because many people have lost their job already, and they're in tremendous financial difficulties, and our mosque being distributing what we call zakah, which is the financial help for this community. But how can we collaborate and work with the local NGOs and nonprofits in reducing the impact on our community, and that required for us to work with our friends from the Jewish community and the Christian community and others. That is in a nutshell what we've been doing, and I'm open for the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Imam Magid. We're now at the conclusion of our speakers, and I want to allow a little time to inform you of some of the questions that have come in, some of the better questions. Here's one. I don't know, perhaps this is for Dr. Azyu or for Dr. Siti or others. Eid al-Fitr is about 2 weeks away. Muslims generally do Eid prayer together on large open space, such as sports fields or roads. How do you think Eid will go this year? What policies will the government impose? What can we expect from MUE, NU, and Muhammadiyah?
Should I answer that?
Yes, why don't
David?
you try that one?
I think most likely the situation is not going to be better, to get better in the next 2 weeks. So I think we Muslims should, I think, should hold to the opinion of MUI and also Muhammadiyah and NU, that in the case of, particularly in the so-called red zone like Jakarta, red zone is the area where badly hit by this COVID-19, like Jakarta and also Surabaya and some other places in Java and also in Sumatra and in Sulawesi. And then probably in the green zone, we have three kind of zone. The red zone, I think in the red zone, most likely we are not going to have Eid al-Fitr prayer. And then we have also yellow zone. And in the case of yellow zone, MUI and also NU and Muhammadiyah suggested to the local religious leader, Muslim leaders, to the Imam, to consult the government, governors or chief of district and health officials in order to determine whether it is quite okay to go ahead to do prayer in open space or probably also in the mosque.
Thank you.
I think that's it.
If any other comment on that, or we can move to the next question. And also, are there any other members of the Religious Council on the line that would like to speak that I'm not aware that you're here? Or anyone? All right. Next question. Based on
United States, you made a decision will not have a Eid prayer. You made a decision already because of the situation.
Excellent.
Yeah, let me inform you that up until now, around 20% mosques are still having prayer, mostly in the so-called green zone. Green zone. There are villages or small cities that are still considered as a green zone rather than red zone.
Yeah. Thank you. Another question is, based on the existing reality in the community, there are a small number of people who do not heed the MUE fatwa, do not heed the government's call to avoid crowds. What do you think is the cause? Is it overwhelming desire to see relatives? Is it some anti-government feeling, or what would be the cause for the people who are resisting the ban on Budik? Dr. Siti, perhaps?
Yes. This is actually the questions that has been around in the social media, and we also hear and witness about the issue of anti-Islam when the governments try to comply with the COVID-19 protocols and also with their MOE guidance. So we have to manage this carefully, and the government decision is actually in lines with what Professor Azra has already highlighted, that there is a free zone that the governments actually try to negotiate to negotiate with their intentions of their Muslims to have a prayer in their public public area. One is the reds, the yellow, and the green. So of course the authority, the local authority, the provincial, also the districts and the local authorities are also in the close coordinations with the major and the main religious organizations in respond to that. And we witness also that a small groups, Jama'ah Tabligh, for instance, this is actually the examples on how the virus can easily spreading in one groups, and now the government is working with Jama'ah Tabligh in order to stop the virus from spreading by persuading them to suspend temporarily suspending the da'wah activities, because this is just the ample examples that we have, because the virus will not select people, whether the people is very pious people or whether the gathering is for partying or praying. So this is the same. So in discriminated manner of this virus has to be understood, and the protocol has to be strongly observed by our Muslim brothers and sisters, because it is just temporarily, so that we will have a new norm, we will have a new life after this virus has gone. So this is actually the strong persuasions from the governments that of course our brothers and sisters, Muslim brothers and sisters, complies with MUI, Muhammadiyah and Nahdlatul Ulama guidance for the comings of Idul Fitri and also the coming of Mudik. Ambassador Mariel.
Thank you so much. We have perhaps one or two more questions in the time. This is for Yenny, Ibu Yenny. Thank you so much for your insightful remarks. What do you think causes the convergence of the conservatives and progressives when it comes to the COVID-19 response? And do you think this joint effort will hold once we have the COVID-19 behind us, or will reemerge?
Thank you. I think like what Katherine mentioned before, there are greater issues at hand that people realize and then think that they should focus on. And so this is where I think there's the convergence line between the usually divided communities or usually divided groups. And I think they recognize that there's even greater danger in the form of the virus that is beyond one's ideological leanings or one's political belief. So we do hope that that this pandemic is actually a good start for the way human beings will behave in the future, in terms of how we relate to the environment, in terms of how we relate to one another. We are as vulnerable, whether we are people of religious beliefs, whether we are believers or non-believers, we are as vulnerable. And that this is a good start, a good place to start treating one another as compatriots in this war against the pandemic. And the way to do that is to have a collective actions together. And the real challenge, I think that the religious leaders have a huge task ahead of them, which is to convince people, convince their congregations to adopt a better way of living beyond this COVID, so that the next time we have another pandemic, that we'll be more ready than this. And we know that the government alone cannot be depended upon to find solutions. It has to come from many cross sectors approaches, and so I think religious leaders will play greater roles in the future, and I'm quite optimistic that if we can find common platforms and common issues together, that there's actually a great what we call hikmah, or a great silver lining that will come from this pandemic, David. But if you allow me to just comment, to add a more comment about the mudik issue, the movement from the city to the villages in Indonesia. So there is more than just religious element to that. There's more than just a religious dimension to that, but it's also the cultural dimension to that, and it's also the economic dimension to that. That's the reason why some people are simply not following government's orders or calls from religious leaders to not go home, because they cannot afford to stay in the big cities. They cannot pay rents. They cannot, there's no job for them anymore. So they have to go back home to their village. At least there's a support system for them back in the village. They can still have something to eat there. They can grow their own food, etc. There's also the cultural dimension to this practice of mudik. It's so embedded in our society. Idul Fitri is so identical with going back home and spend time with your loved ones. There's this agony, this emotional agony, even for me, someone like me, who I'd like to believe that I'm a rational being, but the thought of not being able to go home to meet my mom and ask for her forgiveness during the Idul Fitri is very, very, very challenging for me. So there are so many dimensions, not just religious ones, that we have to accomplish, but using religious language, I think, can be quite a strong way, quite a convincing way to help people to understand that there is a greater good, there is a maslahah that we can achieve by practicing social distancing. Thanks, David.
Thank you so much. I think the time has come for us to conclude this webinar. It's a fascinating subject. We could go on. I know one subject we haven't touched is, are you having the same tensions in Indonesia between the desire to keep pushing ahead on eradicating coronavirus versus the desire to open the economy? And I think those issues are still ahead of us in both Indonesia and the United, and certainly they're with us in the United States. But
the difference, David, is that we don't have people parading with guns here. Sorry.
All right. I'd like to thank all our panelists, all our USINDO members, all our terrifically robust number of new viewers who've tuned into this broadcast. Also to mention that we have various degrees of cooperation on this program with a couple other institutions, cooperating with the Voice of America, which will rebroadcast some of this panel. We're cooperating with the Stimson Center, and we're cooperating with Ed America, the Ed America program of the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta. We thank them all. We thank our panelists. We thank our audience, and wish we get through this crisis together using our best values, and judgment. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.